India played an absolutely integral role in helping us overcome that economic crisis.
Journalist, photographer, political
I
strategist.
mentioned the people are looking for a change, and that can only be done through an election.
After reporting on Sri Lanka's biggest political stories, he crossed to the other side of government. He served as Director of International Affairs to President Ranil Wickremesinghe, helping shape Sri Lanka's engagement with the world during one of its most turbulent periods. Today, he writes and speaks on geopolitics, trade, and foreign policy. This is Dinouk Colombage on From the Island.
Everybody is looking to see what they can get out of the other person. So Sri Lanka needs to be the same. What can we get out of our regional neighbors? The only thing that people are reliant on us is cinema. That is our only export that we have a monopoly over. America, who we've had a long and deep relationship with, overnight with the Trump tariffs slapped us hard, and they keep slapping us. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, has an abundance of energy. You wouldn't think that with our energy prices. We have somebody just 100 kilometers north of us who desperately is looking for energy. Sell it to them. Make ourselves suddenly not a reliant neighbor, but a producing neighbor. Why are we closing off access to what will be the second largest economy in the world? We like this idea of a friend to all, but in practice, where does it end? When do we stop allowing ourselves to be the punching bag by one country who's trying to get one over by the other country?
Dinouk, welcome to From the Island.
Thank you. Thanks. Great to be here.
So before I ask you anything, I want to put my own view on the table. I think, Dinouk, this episode is going to be about foreign policy. I think we've been sold a very comfortable lie about the world we live in, that there are rules, that international law matters, and if you're a good citizen of the international community, your country will do well. When I think about international relations and how people view it, they often frame it from the view of morality and ideals. I have a very different approach. I think we live in an anarchic world at the very top, and states can only survive in two ways: by building value, so that everyone is dependent on you, and by building leverage, so it becomes too costly to actually bully you. But we call ourselves a friend to all, and we're actually the most exposed when we deal. So we negotiate from a position of weakness. Do you share that sentiment? What is your view of the world we live in?
Definitely, we live in a world that on paper, it would seem that there's a rules-based order. But those rules don't apply to everyone. Those rules apply only when it's not in line with the bigger powers' agenda. If we look at what's happening now, we can see the US, the European powers, they have thrown aside those rules because where there are complete disregard of the rules-based order by allied states of theirs, those fall in line with their agendas for the international community. So we have fooled ourselves into thinking this idea that there is structure to the global order. There was when World War II ended. I think that generation and the countries at the time, they were not ready to ever fall back into a war. And they were determined to bring about a structure, which is what we saw through the United Nations and so forth. A sense of, I think, lethargy has kicked in.
Okay.
A sense of unipolarity has emerged with America being the dominant power. And now what's happening is that unipolar order is being challenged. It's being challenged by the Asian states, China, India. To a lesser extent, we have the Gulf states who are beginning to push back. The African countries. I mean, we have forgotten about them. We're so focused everywhere else. Yeah. The African countries are quietly building up their own economies.
Yeah, we've forgotten about it so much. I've not even included Africa. Good point, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so these are, and to I don't want to say old powers because, there's cycles. And so let's say the previous cycle's powers of the US and Europe. This is the biggest threat to them. That challenges are emerging from all areas. We can't just say that there's a challenge in China. There's a challenge from China. There's a challenge from India. There's a challenge from Africa, Southeast Asia. I mean, all over there are challenges coming. So what they have done is they found it convenient to just disregard the rules-based order. Now, when you look at Sri Lanka, unfortunately, you rightly said, we like this idea of a friend to all. In theory, yeah, that's a nice thing. But in practice, where does it end? When do we stop allowing ourselves to be the punching bag by one country who's trying to get one over by the other country? Let's go back to March this year. Just after the outbreak of the Iranian war, we had an Iranian vessel who was returning from a naval exercise in India. So it wasn't a military operational vessel. It was sunk within our exclusive economic zone. Now, we stayed silent on it. India, who is the accepted net security provider, stayed silent on it. And we had America gloating about it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that, Sri Lanka was supposed to take any sides in the war, but there should have been some recognition and some outcry and pushback against what was clearly a blatant disregard of the Indian Ocean zone of peace by the Americans. Unfortunately, because we're a friend to all, had we spoken out, we would have either angered the Americans or we would have angered the Iranians, both countries of which we have,
We have angered both of them.
We have. By staying silent, we have angered both of them. By not speaking out, we have angered both of them.
Yeah.
So, where does it go from there for Sri Lanka? And I think the faster that Sri Lanka and our foreign policy, teams recognize that friend of all is not a possibility anymore, that, we're going to have to start taking some strategic decisions in our alliances, not by any way advocating that, we cut off ties with one country or we go to war with one country, but we need to now start taking stands on matters that will, in the long term, benefit us. If you take Sri Lanka's decision, the matter of the Iranian vessel, it was shown that it's open hunting season on vessels entering our waters.
Yeah.
Now, Sri Lanka is an island, but strategically placed in the Indian Ocean, but a clear signal went out to the rest of the world that Sri Lanka won't protect visiting vessels in their waters. Where does that leave us?
Neither India.
Yeah, and India also, they were caught unawares. And when we look at them in this current context, in some ways they have lost a bit of ground to Pakistan.
Yep.
Nobody would have expected Pakistan to take such a leading role in the conflict that's going on, but Pakistan stepped up. They decided that, I'm going to be a friend for all, but I'm going to lean towards America.
Yeah.
I'm going to play on their egos because at the end of the day, that's where I'm going to benefit from.
Yeah.
They're getting ahead. India decided we're going to stay out of this. We like Israel. We have close relations with Israel. America and us are, things are a little iffy right now, but we like America. Iran, there are benefits to it, but may not outweigh the rest. So let's just stay silent. It's too much. Let's just deal with it another day.
Right.
And what's happened is they've been caught with their pants down, to be honest.
Yeah. The notion of being a friend in an anarchic world makes no sense to me because there are no friends in international relations. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Look, everybody is looking to see what they can get out of the other person. So Sri Lanka needs to be the same. What can we get out of our regional neighbors? What can we get out of our international allies? America, who we've had a long and deep relationship with, overnight with the Trump tariffs slapped us hard, and they keep slapping us.
Yep.
So if we're talking about friends, those aren't actions of friends. But then that's America. They're looking out for themselves. You can't blame them for that. So how do we look out for ourselves also?
Yeah, I know. Trump called Modi a killer, I think.
Yes,
you remember
that's
that.
right,
And
yeah.
then I met one of our previous guests who's Indian. He said, who needs enemies when you have friends like America?
Absolutely. And we can't rely on the kindness of strangers. We can't rely on the kindness of friends. Sri Lanka needs to sit back for a minute and really decide what is our national interest on the international stage. Where does it align? And we need to go with that. And if that does not align with the traditional allies that we had, tough. We need to, weather that storm, because at the end of the day, we can't keep riding on the coattails of the bigger nations.
Well, you were in charge of the International Relations Office in President Ranil's office, administration. What were your discussions like in order to actually build this value and leverage that you are talking about?
There was a very concerted effort for Sri Lanka's foreign policy to undergo a shift towards a more Asia-centric one. If you look at it currently, we are an Asian country in name alone. We have some of our closest economic ties are with Europe and the US. we are running trade deficits with India and China, as is most people, because especially China, because they're producing everything in the world. But we needed to reevaluate where we stood. And we had to recognize that the 21st century is the century of Asia. It's not a if but when scenario. So Sri Lanka needed to get ahead of this wave. We are strategically placed, but this strategic placement of Sri Lanka is something that, again, we have loved to just throw out. We have not in any way been able to really utilize that location. I mean, we're central in the Indian Ocean. If you look at the Indian Ocean, last year alone, between $20 to $24 trillion worth of trade moved through it. 20% of the global GDP originates from the region. It is an economic highway for the global economy. By 2050, 3 of the top 20 nations are going to be from the Indian Ocean, including our closest neighbor, India. They're going to be number 2. So all the benefits are there. But how do we actually leverage our position to benefit from this situation? And during the 22 to 24 period, efforts were undertaken to ensure that our economy will be transformed to a deal and address the shortcomings in the Asian economies.
Okay.
Case in point being, let's look at our apparel industry. For the last 10 years, it has been stagnant. We haven't moved beyond $2 billion. It is a crime when we look at how far ahead Bangladesh has got ahead of us. I mean, Vietnam just completely overshadows us. India is overtaking us. India has now got trade deals with the EU, and so they're going to overtake us even further. So why were we so caught up in just clinging on to one industry? I'm not saying push the apparel industry out, provide whatever support it is to keep it going, but we needed to shift, and that's where we started to explore ideas of energy. If you take South India, fastest growing states of India in the south, they are carrying that country. But they're also going to face severe energy shortfalls in the coming 10 years. Sri Lanka, on the other hand, has an abundance of energy. You wouldn't think that with our energy prices, or the fact that every now and again we have a power cut when the drought kicks in. But there is an estimated 60 to 70 gigawatts per hour of energy in the northwest of the country. That's solar and wind energy.
Okay, talk about purely renewables. Yeah.
Purely renewable. We don't need anything more than 20, let's say 25, give ourselves a nice buffer. That's still leaving us with almost 50 gigawatt. Now, where does that excess energy go? We have somebody just, 100 kilometers north of us who desperately is looking for energy. Sell it to them.
Yeah.
Make ourselves suddenly not a reliant neighbor, but a producing neighbor for India. They will suddenly they will look at us completely differently because they realize that, hang on, with the flip of a switch, we can turn off the lights to them.
Yeah.
So let's provide to them. They're going to buy. This was told to the former president by Prime Minister Modi when they last met in India when he was president. If you have energy, I will buy it. We were exploring jumping on. There's the energy line that's being explored between Australia, Singapore, and India. Sri Lanka is looking on getting into that as well. Suddenly we have another 2 countries.
Yeah.
I mean, Australia is not really going to need with their renewable sources, but Singapore. I mean, Singapore is running, that's an economics fairy tale of its own. But there were supply chains in the energy sector which we could get into.
To plug into.
And people wanted in. So it was a case of, okay, we're shifting. And India was not alone. India was our target because, as I said, second largest economy in the next 24 years. But Sri Lanka wanted to position, or we wanted to position Sri Lanka as a stepping stone to India. Every country is looking to get into India. Everybody wants to get in it. We are 2 to 3 rounds of negotiations away from ETCA, the Economic and Technology Cooperation Agreement.
That's the ratified, the amended version.
The amended version. 2 to 3 rounds away from it. Suddenly we have access that every other country wants. And suddenly Sri Lanka begins to look as a very attractive investment. Because you invest in Sri Lanka, suddenly you're not looking at just a 20 million market. You're looking at a 1.4 billion market.
Right.
So how do we offer those opportunities to the world? And how does Sri Lanka really become that logistics and energy hub that connects South Asia with Southeast Asia? So that was our big focus during those 2.5 years when we were in office.
So that's how you guys viewed building the notion of value and leverage.
Absolutely. Sri Lanka needed to go beyond just being a port that, every now and again got a little bit of an upgrade, but really, at any point in reality, we can be bypassed. Sesa Samudra project in India. I mean, that's, in the early 2000s, it was designed to build a channel right through India, which would have allowed ships coming from West Asia bypass Sri Lanka, just go across this channel and they're in the Bay of Bengal and onwards to Southeast Asia. At the time, it was shelved because of environmental concerns. But let's look around. There's very few world leaders who are taking environmental concerns seriously. So,
well, at what cost, though? We're thinking about environmental concerns, but at what cost?
Absolutely.
It's economic suicide.
It is. I mean, if India brings this in suddenly, economically it makes sense for them. But environmentally, I think the economic fallout from the environmental damage will be fairly significant. So I don't think there is, at this stage, a balancing act playing out. But look, as I said, leaders are not really focused today on environmental matters. So Sri Lanka needs to get ahead of this. Any day now, they could suddenly decide, let's relook at it. This was a project 20 years ago we were exploring. Technology has changed, let's explore it again. So our ports need to be upgraded. We were pushing ahead with plans to expand Colombo port to the Colombo North port near Jayala. Suddenly then we're catering to West Asia.
Right.
Trincomalee port, something that's been on the cards for decades. We were looking at moving our refinery to Trincomalee, having the pipeline with a tripartite agreement with India, UAE, and us to connect India. And suddenly we have opened up the Bay of Bengal on the east side of the country. So efforts were underway to reposition Sri Lanka as this transport and logistics hub, not just for the Indian Ocean, but for Asia. Because we become that opening for West Asia who wants to get into India. Because remember, India's Western neighbors aren't the friendliest.
Yeah.
And then on the east also, again, India is landlocked in that sense. So we had to position ourselves.
So I understand the notion of this. This is a great way to build value and leverage energy, transportation, logistics. I guess it's the only cards that we really have in our hand, unless you can think of anything else really.
Security. The Indian Ocean is, as I said, economically, it's one of the main highways for the global economy.
Yeah. Right.
But we're also a very volatile region. 5 of the main maritime choke points are in the Indian Ocean. You got the Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, Bab Mandel. I mean, these are all areas that we saw what's happened with the Strait of Hormuz. Before February, nobody even knew the name. Now everybody's an expert on it. Yeah. But overnight, the Iranians were able to close it. And they have sent that very clear message that at any point we can close the strait. So how do we ensure that the Indian Ocean also remains free of big power rivalry, free of encroachment by military powers? And one such way was the Colombo Security Conclave. Again, when it first started, it was a tripartite dialogue between Sri Lanka, Maldives, and India. It sort of fell by the wayside as the years went on. Then, 2015 time, it kicked off again. Then it sort of slipped by. Then 2022, again, we brought it. And then we went ahead and signed MOUs, which have now seen the Secretariat established in Sri Lanka. So a security structure needs to be established for the Indian Ocean. We can't fool ourselves into thinking that peace means no military.
Yeah.
You need deterrence. Our deterrence in the best possible way would be an established security structure for the Indian Ocean that brings in the littoral states. The Colombo Security Conclave has expanded from the 3 countries I originally named to include Mauritius, Seychelles, Bangladesh. France has taken on an observer status. Australia also wants to play a role in it. South Africa expressed interest as well. It's only a matter of time before more countries come in and play some role in this.
But will that make a difference, Dinouk? Because at the end of the day, it comes down to hard power.
It does.
So if you're thinking about a world where there is no referee, even if you wanted to implement the changes that you're talking about with the energy and logistics, we haven't been able to. Is part of that reason because you have great powers pressuring us and we cannot stand up to that, right? And I want to get to the Iran war after this, but isn't that the reality?
There's reality to that. We have to recognize that we are not a large power, but we also have to recognize what we have which the big powers want, and that is location. Look at Singapore. They had absolutely nothing, and to date they still haven't been able to, or big powers still haven't been able to exert influence over them like they would. It is a tug of war for the Singaporeans between America and China, but they're holding firm. You need the political will. You need political will domestically. You need to be able to take a decision and not fear getting a call, whether it's from Delhi, Beijing, Washington. Those calls will invariably come for something. But if the political will there is to push through it, the big powers will eventually fall in line because they will recognize that we're going ahead with it. So how best can we then move along with it? Diego Garcia, Mauritius finally, they got it out now. Neither the US or the UK were happy about it, but they fell in line now, obviously, because of the regional struggles. There's another question mark over the base.
Right.
But they pushed through and they got it going. So similarly, Sri Lanka needs to take the plunge and bring this take these decisions that it won't happen overnight, but in the long term, medium to long term, the strength of the results of those decisions will come to the forefront. For example, energy. Sri Lanka becomes an energy hub and a distribution center for energy for South Asia. As much as the big powers want to push back, they will know that they can't because they're going to cripple the South Asian markets and the South Asian economies.
Why do you assume they don't want to suppress the South Asian economies?
I think they recognize that the South Asian economies will still contribute, and mainly India, Pakistan and Bangladesh also pushing ahead. But I don't think they want to suppress them. I think they want to exert influence over them. They want to make sure that those economies are running in the direction that they want them running in.
Right.
It's, as I said, the shifting power trend that we're seeing now, which is seeing the power centers shift away from America and Europe towards Asia, it's happening. They can't stop it. So better they get in ahead and try and influence it to make sure that they continue to hold the cards rather than try and stop something which can't be stopped. Take the Trump tariffs. Most countries took the hit and then they said, right, we're going to find alternative markets. India immediately, credit to India, they did not run after America straight away. They secured the UK, they secured the EU, they started to tour relations with China. So they showed options are there.
Flexibility. Yeah.
So I think that these countries, they would love to suppress it, but they can't. And I think they recognize the reality of that. So instead, they're going to try and influence it.
Do you feel that the political will of Sri Lanka, based on your personal experiences in government, is there an understanding of this world that we live in a world where presidents get kidnapped, they get killed? Do we have that?
Definitely during my time, I think at the very top, there was a very clear understanding. But I told you this before the conversation, that certain things that we say are going to get ourselves crucified, but there is a disconnect.
Yeah.
between the foreign policy teams in the country
Yeah.
and the leaders. If you
Right.
take our time in government, there was very little support for the president's initiatives outside of the secretary to the
Okay.
Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was very capable and she supported the president fully. Unfortunately, her ministry was not capable of carrying that through. And that is because the sad fact is foreign policy in Sri Lanka has taken a back step completely. We don't have the diplomats that we had during the Cold War. 57, shortly after independence, Sri Lanka was able to ensure that our military forces were built up and trained by the British. Once things calmed down, 1957, we asked the British to leave. 1971, Sri Lanka spearheaded the Indian Ocean Zone of Peace initiative at the UN.
Yep.
The 1950s, well before the non-aligned movement, it was the Colombo Powers Conference and then the Bandung Conference, which Sri
Right.
Lanka again spearheaded. So history is on our side. Unfortunately, somewhere along the line, the foreign policy and the foreign diplomats dropped the ball. And that is where I think it falls. So we fell short. And I think we're continuing to fall short even today, which is why we're seeing a naivety on the part of not just the government, but the whole public to what's happening in the Iran war.
Hi guys, if you enjoy this conversation so far, please do like and subscribe. Now back to the video. Right.
They think that, America and Iran signed the peace agreement and everything's going to come back to normal.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So we can actually go to that. Before we go deep into the Iran war, why should a family from Kandy even care about what's happening in Iran? Why does that affect any of us?
We have, the fact is, one of our highest earners are the migrant workers. They're in the Middle East. The Middle East has always been a volatile region. It has just got that much more volatile. For days, the airspaces were closed. There was a lot of uncertainty. Foreigners were leaving. So with all of that, there is the issue of, are foreign earnings going to drop?
Yeah.
Fuel. We are still dependent on fossil fuels that originate from the Middle East. The war meant that prices went up. The price of a barrel of oil goes up, means the price of the food that family in Kandy is buying goes up. Because unfortunately, apart from what we grow, which also means has to be transported from the farms to the markets, to then the shops where they buy it from, all of that increases the cost. We're also importing food. The war in Iran meant that freedom of navigation on the shipping lines were altered. So suddenly, insurance for the shipping companies went up, and
It's premium,
and as we all know, they're gonna pass those on to the consumers, and the consumer is that family from Kandy.
Yeah.
So absolutely, they need to know what's going on. It impacts them. What happens at the top always runs down. What they can do about it is less clear. But I think an understanding of that will allow for the leaders of the country to take decisions that would otherwise seem unpopular or open for interpretation with a great deal of bias.
Right. Fair. I mean, I think it's important that, the average person understands why geopolitics affects them directly. We often think that, this is somewhere in another part of the world, so we don't really need to focus on it, but it directly affects our pocketbooks, our society, social fabric, everything.
Absolutely.
Like you mentioned, that came to our doorstep with this sinking of the submarine. And then I remember a time we didn't do anything about it, right? As you said,
We stayed silent.
We stayed silent. We couldn't. India had no idea. It was much worse for India.
It was.
Much worse. So in this situation, we also, though, refused to dock American a warship here and 2 military aircraft, I believe, that was coming from Diego Garcia.
Yeah.
We refused to do that. But we also pissed off the Iranians. So we have this notion of neutrality that we're trying to take, but we've just pissed off both sides.
Yeah.
Taking this neutral approach, do you think we're punishing ourselves more than we're actually helping ourselves, especially with regard to this war?
I think in the case of the Iranian war, there was no scenario where we should have taken sides. Let's break it down this way. Ayatollah Khamenei was assassinated by the Americans and the Israelis. There's no getting around that.
Yeah.
We did not condemn that assassination. That was an assassination of a recognized head of state.
Yeah.
We may not agree with his policies, we may agree with his policies, but that is not our concern.
Yeah.
He was accepted by the people of Iran,
Yep.
and he was assassinated by a foreign power. We stayed silent on that. We then continued to stay silent when Iran decided that they're going to bomb all of their neighboring states,
Yeah.
who had, yes, they were hosting bases for the Americans, but apart from that, attacks were not being launched from those bases. So in that sense, there was no justification. Again, we stayed silent there. So I think neutrality does not mean silence in the face of these sort of acts that go against what we would call the rules-based order, for the lack of better terminology. Sri Lanka definitely had a moral standing to take on this matter. We are a country that has, in our past, also had interference from foreign powers.
Still do, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, but I think we stayed silent, and we decided instead to go for a bit of cheap theatrics, which was when we finally let the Iranian sailors land, and then suddenly this announcement that, oh, the Americans wanted to bring warplanes from Diego Garcia to Sri Lanka. Now, what military benefit the Americans had by moving a warplane from Diego Garcia to Sri Lanka? They're moving them further away from the theater of war. So, look, we'll leave that up to,
military strategy.
We'll leave it up to military strategists, and we'll leave it up to the conspiracy theorists to decide on that statement. But we chased cheap theatrics. We had people online applauding us. We had these influencers overseas saying, oh, look how great this small country is. We have said no to this. We've said yes to this.
Yeah.
But in actuality, the two countries that mattered, Iran and America, neither of them are happy with us.
Yeah.
Now, had we taken a stand on that situation, had we voiced our opposition to the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei, and had we voiced our opposition to the continuous bombing of all the Middle Eastern states, the neighboring states of Iran, Iran obviously wouldn't have been happy, but they would have also been satisfied with the fact that, we have also recognized the ills that were done to them. The rest of the Middle Eastern states will also be happy that we are not staying silent on this matter. And we have also made it very clear to the international community that we are not taking sides in this, but we do want to see the rules and international laws abided by, because we have been a country that has always been expected to abide by these international laws.
I mean, we don't have a choice in that regard.
We don't have a choice. We don't have a choice because, obviously, on one hand, the big powers have pushed it onto us, but then also, on the other hand, we would want, as citizens, to make sure that our governments abide by these international laws. But then, at the same time, as citizens, we also should expect our government to voice opposition when those international laws are being ignored by the very countries that force it onto us.
Right, yeah.
So all that has happened is, in reality, our foreign policy and our foreign relations apparatus in the country was found to be asleep. And, we have lost far too much ground now to really regain it in terms of this particular conflict.
Yeah, I heard someone say recently that in an attempt to take away weapons of mass destruction from Iran, they gave them weapons of mass disruption.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you view this war going? Because they signed the MOU last week, and then everyone thinks the markets are quite happy. When I talk to people in business here, are like, oh yeah, now we can start going into the market, everything's fine. I have a very different take, but what's your take on the war and how it goes?
Look, they signed the MOU, and then straight away the two countries started bombing each other again.
Exactly.
So it means nothing. And remember, this MOU was only an MOU to say, okay, now we'll take 60 days to negotiate, to come to a ceasefire. And in those 60 days, we're going to have to deal with the most pressing topics, which really neither side has shown any inkling to be flexible on. So I'm pessimistic as to where this will land. I think as far as what has happened, Iran has shown the entire world that, look, as you rightly said, we don't need nuclear weapons. With a few boats, we can disrupt the entire global economy.
Yep.
We have a finger on the trigger now, which at any moment they can pull. So for Sri Lanka, we have to be aware of that. The markets are naive, immature markets in this day and age. We saw that last year with the Trump tariffs, a simple tweet, it goes up, it goes down. Here also, I was reading today that the US's reserve stock of oil has dropped by 5 million barrels. So they're eating into their reserve stock. So even if, let's say, the war ends in totality tomorrow, it's going to take us 6 to 8 months before the supply lines are brought back to normal.
Yeah.
This drop in oil prices, it will probably last a week. Once the uncertainty continues to grow and the actual supplies start to dry up, we're going to see it rise back up. If Sri Lanka had our Trincomalee oil tankers, we could have bought cheap and stored, but that's another matter. But the thing is that Sri Lanka needs to be aware of this, and we can't rely on this idea that when the war ends, everything's going to go back to normal and we'll be fine. The world has changed, and I think it's a permanent change that has come about from this war in Iran. And for Sri Lanka, which is in the key shipping lines, and now we've seen how easily and how fragile freedom of navigation is, we need to be prepared for that. We need to, not only internally, but externally, we need to talk to our regional partners and our regional neighbors to come to some sort of understanding and devise some sort of plan that we can ensure freedom of navigation, at least in our region. You don't want a situation where a vessel gets through, if there's a blockade by anyone, and it is still hunted through the Indian Ocean.
Indian Ocean instead.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't want us to become a scene of war. I mean, we saw that World War II in the Atlantic.
Yep.
German U-boats hunted for fun.
Yep.
Very likely that's something that, that's a possibility that can come up here in the Indian Ocean. The first shot was fired in March, and those who fired it saw that there was no repercussions.
No repercussion. Yeah, that sent out a message to the whole world that this is a ground that you can do anything.
Yeah.
That's a very risky play. How do you view, if you can forecast what you think is going to happen in the war? I mean, no one really knows.
Look, I think Iran is going to drag this through. My personal opinion, I don't think Iran really was looking for the nuclear bomb.
Yeah, I share that sentiment.
I think instead what they have got themselves is they've re-entered the global oil markets.
Yeah.
They have got control over a major choke point, which if they're allowed to actually charge that toll, that's going to have untold impact on the global economy.
It's done.
So Iran is walking away from this smiling. The IRGC in Iran, I think, is walking away smiling because all that has happened in the last few months has shown that the political establishment is weak in Iran, and it's the military establishment that has to run the show.
Right.
As for America, I think Trump will run it for as long as he can, but the Republicans are going to distance themselves as they get closer and closer to the midterms. I think they're not. This is an unpopular war. They don't see any exit from it, apart from accepting whatever Iran says at the table. So I think the Republicans are going to leave Trump to pick up the pieces. And of course, Trump doesn't have another term to worry about. So what he decides to do
it
is
will be for
uncertain.
himself.
Yeah. So until I think, to be very honest, I don't think we're going to see any finality to this till after the midterms in regards to America.
Right.
If the House flips and we suddenly have the Democrats in, then there's going to be, a sizable pushback on Trump's agenda. If the Republicans hold it, they may fall in line again with him.
That's interesting. Because the Iranians wanted to drag this out anyways until the midterms, as predicted. I actually have a slightly different take from you in that I think, as you suggested, Iran has factions and the hardliners have gained control within the IRGC. I think Iran's got great concessions. They're the bigger winner here. I think America has won in the way that we have become dependent on American LNG. Because Qatar was producing most of the world's LNG and the rest comes from Russia. Qatar can't supply that to the world, neither can Russia really. So countries like Japan, South Korea, America's vassal states, are now completely reliant on America. So the dollar will improve through those exports. Yeah. And I kind of wonder, because I have here, because as you suggested, they attack the GCC states. They control the Strait of Hormuz. Those states pump the AI bubble into America. That will completely destroy the global economy. I don't see a situation where there won't be boots on the ground in Iran.
You don't see a situation where so you're expecting them to?
I think there will be boots on the ground either early next year or the end of this year, after the midterms, because I don't think the Democrats are actually going to push back on that. They are going to try to impeach Trump if he does not put boots on the ground, because they're all part of the pro-war establishment that wants Iran to fall in this regard.
I think the problem there is putting boots on the ground is one thing. The GCC states, and especially countries like Qatar, who we all know does play the double game, UAE also, Saudi Arabia. These are all countries that have been, to a great extent, let down by the US in this war. UAE especially, and Kuwait, Bahrain, they've all bared the brunt of the bombings by Iran with very little support from America in terms of the Iron Dome kicking in. They made sure the greater majority was deployed in Israel. Now, whether these countries are going to then allow for American troops to be brought into their countries and launch attacks from there, or support ground offensive, I think that's the biggest question. If we look at, take Saudi Arabia, why did they sign that military pact with Pakistan? At the end of the day, Pakistan there got the short end of the straw because suddenly Saudi Arabia has a nuclear ally.
Yeah.
So Saudi Arabia is suddenly not overly reliant on the US as they were. They're trying to repair relations with Israel. They're trying to repair relations with the rest of the Gulf states. And they have a nuclear ally now in their corner who is also trying to get a foothold in the Gulf. So I don't see Saudi being overly open to US troops on the ground or any sort of support. I don't see Pakistan doing it. We have to remember when George Bush launched the war on terror in 2001-2, their biggest supply route was Pakistan. I don't see Pakistan. Pakistan has made it clear that they will be in America's corner as far as diplomatic efforts are carried out. They're not going to go and then say, all right, you know what, launch from us. I think they are trying to make up for lost ground, and they have sensed the opportunity that suddenly Pakistan can reposition itself as not this militarized state that harbors terrorists, but rather they can be a player on the international diplomatic stage, which, the added benefit is suddenly they're getting one up over India.
Yeah.
So in that sense, they're not going to then throw their lot into a war on Iran, which...
Do they have a choice though, Dinouk? Because even Saudi Arabia, from my understanding, they were quite keen on the US intervening in Iran.
I think they were. I think definitely Saudi Arabia was at the start, and I think they've realized that the prolonged period and the fact that America was not, I think at the beginning, had America put troops on the ground,
Right.
Saudi Arabia would have supported it. I think now it has dragged on long enough for Iran to establish defense networks. I mean, Iran's just a simple geography of the country means that an invasion is very difficult.
Impossible.
Supply lines can easily be cut off. So in that sense, you're looking at a war that I'm not going to compare it to Vietnam because that was but it will be one that will, extract a heavy toll on America. So, and Saudi Arabia knows that America will pull out. Look, let's be honest, since World War II, America hasn't actually won a war.
Nope.
So
Nope.
Saudi Arabia is not going to throw their whole behind in this. So instead, I think there will be push. As I said, I'm not convinced whether the Democrats will want to see an expansion of the war, but there definitely will be a push by Trump to try and get troops on the ground if he's not getting what he wants. I don't think he'll have the support that will be able to sustain a ground offensive.
Assuming that this is where it goes, what can Sri Lanka or Sri Lankans do to brace ourselves?
Look, we need to move fast in terms of our energy sector. We need to diversify. We brought in, 220,000 vehicles last year. I read somewhere that 30% of the vehicles that came in were hybrids or electrics. Now, I don't know if that's that, but when you look at the roads, there is a significant amount. But suddenly, we're powering these electric vehicles with fossil fuels. Where, as I said, we have an abundance of renewable energy. It's not something that can happen overnight, but it's something that can happen in the next 3 to 5 years. Adani, they are coming in. Now, there were questions over the agreement with the Adani group. We should not have thrown them out or pushed them out. We didn't throw them out. I know they like to take credit saying that they canceled it, but Adani said, no, we're leaving. But we should have negotiated if we weren't happy with the rates. And I think Adani wants their foothold, so they would have been open to the negotiation.
Right.
On top of that, there was, 50 odd smaller renewable energy projects that are just stuck because of bureaucracy and because of blocks by the CEB. There's no beating around the bush. The CEB is not renewable energy friendly.
No.
So that's $3 billion worth of investment. And suddenly we have renewable energy, which, we're not going to become completely renewable energy producing country. We're not going to be completely independent of the fuels and energy sources that's coming from the Gulf, at least not in the next 20 years. But what we are doing is we're cushioning the blow that is happening to us. We're going to have to do or make a big push on our food security. There'll be disruptions from what is coming from Europe our way in terms of wheat and all, as long as these tensions in the Middle East continue. So there needs to be a concerted effort. There needs to be support for the agriculture sector, for the farmers, to ensure that we are producing at our highest levels. I mean, India and all are going ahead with that. They have, partly with the war in Iran, partly with the El Nino coming in. They have bolstered their agriculture production and their support for the farmers. We too need to go down that path.
But I believe India is in a very precarious position where they're risking a very serious famine, in my opinion, because of the fertilizer shortage.
Yeah. That is something that's out of our control. We should have. Again, there's a lot of would have, should have, could have, but we should have moved immediately. And this is where I'm saying that, there's a disconnect when you look at our foreign relations apparatus in the country. When the moment the first missile was fired, there should have been immediate moves to establish a dedicated committee of officials and experts from the private sector to help come up with a policy, because our first call of port should have been China. And we should have bolstered our stock of fertilizer. We wasted time. We walked, this idea that America was going to supply the whole world, Russia was going to supply the whole world, it's not happening.
No.
So we should have, again, moved quickly. Now we're too late.
Yeah.
In my opinion, we're too late.
No, because the rest of the world also wants the same thing.
That's the thing. Everybody knows it's, and it's not just the war in Iran. It is the El Nino that's coming into effect.
Yeah.
Everyone else is preparing for that. But because we are not literate on our foreign policy, we've often find ourselves chasing an issue rather than getting ahead of it.
Why do you think we can't negotiate with Russia to buy discounted oil? What's stopping us?
I think our market is too small for the Russians. The Russians know that they are in prime position right now. India wants them. India is buying up. India is buying up excess. Everything that's there, they're buying up in their story. And again, as we discussed this, what is in it for Russia to sell to us? They're not, they can go and sell to anyone. If we're not going to buy X amount, millions, they know there's 100 other takers globally. So Russia wants something else from us. So what can we give them? What can we entice them with that doesn't put us at jeopardy, but ensures that we're able to buy this fuel from Russia?
What does Russia want from us? I would assume they actually, my understanding, they want some exploration rights also.
I think they want presence. They want presence in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
They signed this military pact with India.
Yeah.
They want to expand themselves down here. Look, Russia's historically, for the last 3 centuries, Russia has always wanted to expand down southwards. They have wanted a foothold in South Asia, and then in terms the Indian Ocean. So they want access. Now that it's not an easy one, I can't sit here and tell you, look, let's give Russia A, B, and C, and they're going to give us X, Y, and Z.
But why not? Why not? Because Russia is a middle power, right? It's not one of the 2 superpowers like China and the US.
Yeah, I think because Russia is as you rightly said, is a middle power. They have a current love-hate relationship with the Trump administration. China, they have the friendship with no boundaries, but that is because China is holding all the cards.
Yeah.
So suddenly you have Russia coming in, getting a foothold here, which is something that now China has lost to a great extent. America is also still wants some sort of role to play here. So suddenly you have the 2 big powers seeing this middle power slip into a spot where they would like a seat at the table.
Isn't that great for us? Same with India. Why not play the big powers?
I think India is better placed to balance out.
Play that role.
Yeah. I don't think Russia is. Russia is too far from us. When we're balancing out India, China, and the US, they're on opposite ends. And we do that with India, and we use India as the balancing act. That's fine because India's our closest neighbor. We got Russia, who's further north. Russia has to still deal with the war in Ukraine. That's not going anywhere. They have to deal with hostilities in Europe. They've made, I think, too many enemies right now for Sri Lanka to throw its entire lot in with Russia. That's not to say that we're, not to look at what we can get out of it. And as you said, there's the opportunity for cheap oil. But what can we give them that can entice them while not pissing off the rest? And that comes down to the balancing act. And
Right.
Russia wants access. They have always floated the idea of a nuclear power plant here. We weren't happy about it. India is not happy about the idea of a nuclear power plant on their doorstep.
Yeah.
So what can we, bring them in with?
Fair. Well, to go back to the energy and the renewable part, you're saying that we can cover up our energy wants through those renewables.
Absolutely.
But China controls the renewable production chain. We had the president of the Green Belt and Road Initiative on the podcast, and he was breaking down every process that China controls. And they control it from the start to the finish, for solar, for wind. can a small state like us go from being dependent on fossil fuels and then Qatar, America, to now being dependent on another great power, China? So we are just choosing what we're dependent on. Can we ever become independent truly?
We can, to an extent that our production of renewable energy is placing us in a position where another big power is going to be dependent on us, that being India. So
Right, I understand.
China has suddenly, as you rightly said, they control the supply chains. But suddenly they have a possibility of getting access to the Indian market through a third party. India is not stupid, they know that. But at the same time, they're also recognizing that they need this energy.
Right.
It's, they're going to rely, and that's where Sri Lanka has to play the role as a mediator in that sense, where we are able to balance out the two powers. Now, we are, as you rightly said, we're dependent on LNG from Qatar, the fuels from the Middle East. Now, for some reason, we bought fuel that apparently we can't use from America.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a different story.
That's a whole different story. Now, those, we're getting it, but nobody's dependent on us for it then afterwards. The supply stops with us, if you know what I mean. Right? We use energy and then that's it.
It's done, right? We're not a hub.
Absolutely. Right. Where suddenly, components and all are coming from China. They control those. But it comes to us. And it's not, you got a small portion that comes in to support us. Got the larger portion that's suddenly going around the region. And that is why when I mentioned, the power connectivity between, our energy connectivity between Australia, Singapore, and India, we needed to get in on that as well. Because the more we integrate with these connectivity projects in the region, the better placed we are to have buffers against the big power rivalries, rather than just being, in all a sense, an island in that sense.
Yeah.
Because everything that we are then taking from the big power ends with us. It doesn't move on to another spot.
Right. No, I understand that. Yeah. And there is no other way, really.
There isn't. I mean, look, we have to face reality that there's always somebody we're going to have to answer to. But how can we make sure that in turn, big or small, there's somebody that has some reliance on us as well?
Right.
Right now, that's not the case.
No one's reliant on that.
I mean, from our exports, when you really look at it, the only thing that people are reliant on us is cinnamon. That is our only export that we have a monopoly over.
I mean, well, we have graphite, which we don't use. We sold that to an American company.
Yeah, that's right, the Bogle graphite. Yeah. I mean,
that value alone would have given us just like the Strait of Hormuz, that resource alone is so critical in everything in the world. And we gave it up.
We did. And that was, those were probably, the faults of when we rushed into the open economy, that there are certain areas that we just, sort of, because we lacked expertise locally, we just gave it. And I mean, those are things that need to be looked at. But so we need to look at those, though, and recognize that these resources need to be kept in-house, but they also can't be guarded.
Right. And in terms of the food, because energy and food are the backbone of an economy. So in terms of food, how would you get to an independent spot?
We need to look at an aggressive agriculture modernization. We need to also drive a campaign amongst the youth in the country. Now, speaking from personal experience, I have a farm in Dambulla. And our biggest issue is labor.
Okay.
The farmers who come to work for us are all 55 and older. You don't find young people coming into agriculture because they don't see any value in it. They don't like the idea of picking up the udalla and going and working the field like their fathers and grandfathers did. On the flip side, they don't see that there is money to be made. In many ways, their financial futures can be secured through agriculture more than what they're now pursuing. We go into the nature parks very often, and we have a particular driver that we use, but and so when I asked him, They're all from farming families. They have no interest in going back to the farms. For them, they would rather spend their day driving somebody around the park.
Right.
When you put their costs and the rising costs of fuel and vehicle maintenance and all, they're not walking away with big sums.
Makes sense.
So for our food security, it needs to be two-pronged on a domestic front. We need to push a modernization so that our productivity goes up. We also need to drive a greater effort in terms of attracting the youth back into farming so that it's sustainable. Otherwise, what's going to happen is, in very real possibilities, we're going to have migrant workers coming here to work the farms.
Do you really think that's a possibility?
I think it's a possibility. I think places like Bangladesh and all will send people.
Really?
Because I think the agriculture sector will start to feel the pinch.
Right.
And the desperation will kick in because we are predominantly agriculture-based economy. So we can't afford to just say, okay, you know what, we gave it a good run, but it's over. So we're going to have to fill that void.
And on top of the demographic crisis, we face that labor shortage.
Absolutely. I mean, if I remember correctly, the census showed that our population has reduced.
Yeah.
We, during the crisis, 500,000 people migrated, all working age people. So we are facing this very real risk of becoming an aging population where the youth are not being pushed into fields that will protect us as a country and as an economy. And look, if we are able to ensure our food security, we can build ourselves up into becoming, again, an export market for our food, which South Asia's economy, South Asia's populations are growing, and they're going to look for sources of food outside of their own countries.
Yeah.
So again, with a country of just 20 million people, we can produce enough to feed sections of the region.
Yeah, a lot of people tell me, but why focus on agriculture? Because it's a low value sort of thing, but then we all eat. Everyone needs food to survive. So there's a global food shortage.
Absolutely. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we can get by into the country if we don't have the IT experts. And I know my father-in-law is going to see this and bite my head off. But we can't get by if we don't have farmers.
Right. Fair.
Somebody has to make the food for us, grow the food for us. What was our biggest issue facing us during the 2022 crisis? That families were not able to get 3 square meals a day onto their table. That was what the first thing we did when we took over. We spoke to the World Food Program, we spoke to USAID, ADB, all of them. We rerouted funding that was coming into other projects to ensure that we got fertilizer and we got our crops back. So within 6 months, we were suddenly back to producing enough for the populace.
Right.
But that was the biggest issue, because at the end of the day, if people are going hungry, their productivity drops, and it's just a roll-on effect.
Yeah.
The kids, I mean, at school, they'll be introduced to meals for them because they can't operate if they're not fed. That's the bottom line. They can't learn. They can't become productive part of society.
I think it's very sad because when I talk to clients from abroad and when they come to Sri Lanka, they do a lot of CSR projects in schools. And, the difference between European kids and South Asian kids, it's horrific. It makes me very sad, actually. And I saw a statistic recently. I think there's a 30% reduction in grade 1 classrooms in Sri Lanka. 30%.
Okay. I saw that I didn't know the figure, but I saw there has been a sizable reduction. And I'm not surprised. I mean, you go outside of Colombo, there is a noticeable, it is noticeable the malnutrition that is running through our youth.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they try to cover it up by providing them with cheap processed food that just results in further health issues.
Yeah.
So, as a country, we talk about foreign policy, we talk about becoming a logistics and transport hub and key connectivity zone, but if we're not feeding our population, we have failed. That's the bottom line.
What's the point of anything?
Absolutely. If you can't ensure that families have 3 square meals a day on their table, everything else counts for very little.
Very little.
And look at China. great leap forward. They had a famine while they were producing food for the rest of the world, and it knocked them back. It knocked them back badly.
Well, yeah, I'm digressing, but to me that's like the beauty of when dictatorships make mistakes, it's a beauty. I mean, but then they can also develop very fast, but in that whole one-child policy, what they've done, they've shot themselves in the foot for generations to come.
Yeah.
I want to touch on integration with Asia. We often think about Sri Lanka integrating with India, and that's a very big topic of conversation. And I'm half Indian, so I'll get a lot of shit for this. But most Sri Lankans think about India very emotionally. They think of India as like a bully, a brother, savior, whatever. But India is now our largest trading partner. They're a permanent neighbor. You can't change your neighbors. What is your take on the whole India-Sri Lanka dynamic before we move on to the rest of Asia?
India's economy is going to be the second largest by 2050 globally. It may, then fluctuate between 2 and 3 for a few years, but it's there. We only stand to gain if we make ourselves an integral link in the Indian economy. Recently, the conversation came about the land connectivity between Sri Lanka and India, the land bridge. Personally, I'm for it.
You're for it?
I'm for it.
Okay.
I'm for it because we have to look at the pros and cons. And when we look at the arguments against it, they say national security, they say that India is going to just, completely overwhelm us. All the jobs are going to be taken by the Indians, all because of this land bridge. Now, when it comes to national security, we have 1,600 kilometers of coastal belt. Are we saying that we're able to secure those, but we can't secure a single point bridge?
Yeah.
I mean, any military strategist will tell you the easiest area to defend is a choke point.
Sure. Yeah.
So India's size also, they have shown, in the recent past, they've shown no inclination to invade us. But let's say they did, right? Let's say tomorrow, Prime Minister Modi says, I want to invade Sri Lanka. They have a 1.4 million man strong military. 700,000 of them are in Kashmir. You got another 200,000 on the border with China.
Yeah.
You got another 100,000 on the border with Bangladesh. You got another 80 or something thousand in Nepal. So of the 1.4 million, you have about 1.1 million who are on border patrol with their neighbors who, things aren't the best.
Yeah.
So they got 300,000. They're going to send 300,000. We got 150,000. We got 150,000 defending against the choke point. India is not going to rely on a bridge if they want to invade us. They showed that in the 80s when they did the Paripo drop. They can enter our space. And India has no reason. Economically, India's got a 1.4 billion strong market. We got a 20 million market. Their businesses aren't going to be flooding here to get a piece of what is essentially a very small pie. On the flip side, we have the opportunity to enter into that market, whereas every other country wants it. We have to stop and ask that question. Every other country is trying to get in there. Australia has been chasing that down for a long time. The EU has, the UK has, even China. Even with all the issues, they're also still looking at it.
Yeah.
Everybody wants in on that market. We are, as I mentioned earlier, we're 2 to 3 rounds of negotiations away from getting preferential access to it, to an extent where many regional countries are going to then want to come into Sri Lanka to try and use us as a stepping stone. So what is this hesitancy to go into the Indian market and to integrate ourselves with that, especially with the southern states? Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, they're all extremely fast-growing states. They're so close to us. They're going to will benefit, as I said, from energy. Our tourism will benefit because suddenly we're going to be able to bring in and attract a whole new tourist market that we're not attracting right now.
Well, you're saying that like it's a good thing, but I know most Sri Lankans will say we do not want Indian tourists.
Well, let's look at the current tourists that are coming right now. We're patting ourselves on the back saying the number of tourists are increasing month on month.
Yeah,
but our earnings That's the
So,
point. So let's look at bringing in high spenders. We're not chasing this 5 million dream. Go for 1 million and earn $500 a day rather than 5 million earning 100.
Yeah.
The sheer impact of 5 million tourists on us is going to, those will be where issues come in.
Yeah.
So integrating, opening up ourselves to interactions with another economy doesn't mean that we just throw aside all regulations and control. Doesn't mean that if we put this land bridge with India, suddenly we're saying, just like you take a drive down Gore Road, you can take a drive down this bridge from India and come into Sri Lanka. There'll be controls. There needs to be protections. But why are we closing off access to what will be the second largest economy in the world based on ideas that have been propagated since the 50s, 60s, 70s?
Well, if I can play devil's advocate here, is that one of the fear obviously is the Indian labor market flooding us. I do see a real risk with that. You're saying we can control that.
We'll have to. We have to control
have to.
it. Yes.
My skepticism is that we don't have the strength or the capability to control it because we are giving them political leverage, right? What India decides to do with that political leverage is up to them. But do you feel we are we're putting ourselves in a risky position with that? And I'm only talking about the land bridge. I'm not talking about other integrations. We'll come back to that later.
Well, we do. I mean, we are running that risk. And the way...
Thank you to our sponsor, Zeal by Roche, for sponsoring this episode. They're a luxury beachwear brand that make t-shirts like the one I'm wearing. Every member of our team wears their t-shirts and shirts. Check them out on Instagram or the link in the description below. Thank you. Back to the podcast.
I mean, there is obviously legislation that comes in with these matters that, if you take, for example, the Singapore FTA, even from Singapore, only a certain level and above of tiers in terms of workforce can come and work here.
Yes, but Singapore has the ability to negotiate from a position of strength.
Absolutely. I think we also need to bring in these integrations. We need to link them with the negotiations. We need to link them with other things. They can't be siloed. So again, let's bring, as I keep coming back to what is our biggest asset that India wants, is the renewable energy. Link those into the negotiations with ETCA.
Right.
And make sure that, everything plays off one another. Secondly, is, as I said, we're a far smaller market. Ensure that the openings aren't there. And I mentioned earlier, agriculture sector. We are going down a path where we could very well start looking at migrant workers coming in to run the farms.
Yeah.
And then, you can't begrudge landowners, companies in agriculture sector if they start bringing in migrant workers, if there is a shortage of course. So let's plug that gap before we get there.
Right, I understand.
If there aren't the job openings, they'll still come in, they'll start to push for the cheaper labor. There are always these threats, but let's try and plug the gaps and go for a more preventative approach to it rather than just saying, well, we're running the risk of this happening, so let's just throw aside all these benefits that we can get.
Right. I understand that logic. That makes perfect sense. But there's also, the illogical part of this, which is, I think, if you think about what India has done to Sri Lanka with the IPKF and Indira Gandhi's own doctrine for her neighborhood, and then also what all students in Sri Lanka learn in their textbooks about the Indian invasion, so on. There is a lot of fear that is built in Sri Lankans from a very young age that I don't think Indians understand. They have no idea this happens here. So they are all very confused. With that, I can see why the older generations are very skeptical, but the younger ones are more focused on economic growth. So they are less concerned about those things. Do you see a path where we actually do end up having sovereignty, or do you think we will get swallowed up by India as they become the second, third largest economy? Where do you see this going in the next 30 years?
I think we can definitely maintain our sovereignty. I mean, you mentioned about history that is taught to our youth or school kids about the Indian invasion, have they stopped to look at our invasions of India? We sacked Madurai twice. We burnt the city down.
No, exactly.
We have assisted the Pandyan kingdoms,
Yes.
the kings in their battles for the throne.
Yes.
So it has been a give and take in that sense. It has not been a one-way street of, India using us as a whipping boy.
Yeah, but we're not taught that.
We're not taught that. We're not taught that. And I think that it is essential because I have always found that, and it comes, and this is one of the core issues with our foreign policy as a whole, is that we are not taught of where, throughout our history, where Sri Lanka has punched above its weight.
Okay.
Okay, let's take the Bandung Conference. And I mean, I love this story because, this was very much an example of big brother pushing smaller brother around and getting told off. At that conference, Prime Minister Sir John Kotalabla was asked by India's Prime Minister Nehru to show him his speech.
Okay.
And he said, "Are you going to show me yours?" And he said, "No." And he's like, "I'm not showing you mine." And it ended there until Kotalabla stood up and used the platform to compare communism to colonialism.
Okay.
And he pushed back. And he pushed back with a very clear agenda in mind, which was India under Nehru was looking at bringing China into the room and recognizing that they can use China as further strength and further muscle to advance India's agenda. So Sri Lanka decided that we're going to stand and push back on this. It was nothing against China. We had ties with China, but we said we don't agree with their political affiliation. And so we pushed back and we put on India's own agenda there.
Right.
So we have shown that we are capable of pushing back.
Okay.
To ensure sovereignty, though, we can't be reliant on a single nation.
Yeah.
So India, as I said, absolutely integration with India needs to happen. But again, does it mean that Sri Lanka alone integrates with India? Or do we position ourselves through our integration where we are suddenly a stepping stone, where you have the tiger economies of Southeast Asia, the African economies? Suddenly they're stepping into Sri Lanka with the hope of catapulting into India. When we bring that sort of weight to us, suddenly India themselves also recognizing that, okay, you know what, opening our economy is not the worst thing. We're forcing them to open the economy because we're bringing the weight of money with us. That Sri Lanka alone can't do. But in order for that to happen, it means that we need to explore connectivity and integration with the rest of the Asian region and to the African, at least definitely along the east coast of Africa.
Okay.
So India needs to be central, but it doesn't need to be the sole target of our integration. So you were talking about the rest of Asia. This is where the rest of Asia comes in. How do we work our ways with countries like Malaysia, Indonesia? Let's go to West Asia. I mean, Iran is going to be in the top 20 economies by 2050, regardless of what people like to.
Yeah,
so
no, they've accelerated it.
Absolutely. Saudi Arabia. So how can we bring those? I mean, these are all countries that we have ties with. So how can we bring them along with us as we take this step of integration with India?
Right. I'm going to get in trouble for this with my Indian friends. But I think India's... Actually, before we get to that, what is your view on Sri Lanka's political class, their view on India? Because they are very much against integrating with India, especially the current government has been quite, at least factions within the government have been quite tough on that.
I had to remember the JVP, their classes, there was a specific class taught to the JVP cadre, which was an anti-Indian class. I mean, those lessons have supposedly been thrown to the side, but from the president down his cabinet, they all were brought up on this anti-Indian sentiment. And you rightly said, it's not, I mean, it is very strong amongst the current lot, but other political parties also jump on the anti-Indian sentiment because it's an easy win. This is Big Brother, this is who slaps us around, this is, why let's push back on them, knowing that all that we scream and shout doesn't go beyond and doesn't translate into action. So the politicians have found that it's easy for them to slap India around because they know India has also said, yeah, you guys can say what you want to the voters, but at the end of the day, we are never going to go and tell India, no, we're close to you. So the politicians, I think, are using it more as
A vote bank.
a vote bank rather than, actually being committed to seeing through the anti-Indian agenda. But I think that's changing. I think the younger politicians are starting to recognize. They saw that in 22 when India gave us, they gave us $4 billion. They called it a line of credit. They called it a loan. But, it's gone. India is not running behind us for that 4 billion. So India stepped up when the rest of the world sort of turned their back on
For
us.
sure.
And
Sure. I think it goes with, I think it should be acknowledged that without India during that time, Sri Lanka would be having triple-digit hyperinflation.
Absolutely. I was front and center at that time in the president's office, and we know that, India definitely pushed us on issues, and, they're not going to just give us a blank check. But if they didn't step in, the fact of the matter is the country's lights would have been switched off.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. So India played an absolutely integral role in helping us overcome that economic crisis. Now, they did it partly because we are neighbors. We have a long history with them, but they also did it because they see advantages of our economy continuing forward with their influence.
Right.
This is where I come back to that every country will want some sort of influence, and they see value in it. So now it's a case of, okay, how can we capitalize and continue to extract from India while allowing them to extract from us to a certain extent.
Right. And that is the tough part, right? To know to what extent, where it stops.
Yeah. And I think that is where conversations need to happen. Unfortunately, the conversations around or Sri Lanka's integration with India is not widespread enough.
Yeah, and I find it to be extremely emotionally charged. There is no rationality towards the conversation there.
Yeah. We are happier in that sense, and I think, that is a hangover of colonialism. We're happy to open our doors if it's the Europeans or the Americans.
Yeah.
Let's take the GSP Plus.
Yeah.
We will bend over backwards, change
Just to
whatever
keep
laws
that.
we have to keep that.
Yep.
But if it's India, where we stand to benefit a hell of a lot more, we're going to think twice, thrice before we even open the conversation.
No, yeah, I do really believe we're missing a big opportunity here, Dinouk, because our GDP per capita now is what, 4,500 roughly.
Yeah.
I think I just went on AI and just tried different versions to see what our economy would look like if we did integrate with India, and the number went up to about 22,000 in the next 15, 20 years, just by fully utilizing each state in India, because every state is like a different country.
Yeah. What Tamil Nadu will want from us is different from what Uttar Pradesh will want from us. So why not capitalize on that? Why not recognize that? But be ready to have the tough conversations with India also.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's not a case of where we're going to replace, the EU GSP Plus or America's trade with us for India. We got to learn from our mistakes in the past.
Right.
And that is where going into these negotiations, it needs to come with leverage. And at the end of the day, our silver bullet is energy and renewable energy. So let's use it and ensure that we have the leverage that we need, which, opens the doors for countless possibilities.
Right. Well, yeah, so we are making mistakes on our own by not really engaging in the way we should, but I'm going to get in trouble, but I have major criticisms of the way India deals with us. Big time. I feel like you might have a different perspective, but I feel like they're very short-sighted in how they deal with us. I feel like they separate economics from security. If they simply opened up their market without making it a big deal, I think they negotiate with us the same way they would negotiate with America. It's transactional, which I understand in this world. But if they simply opened up their entire market to us, it's a drop in the ocean for them. right? They don't need the same concessions from us. What they would get is a security guarantee. But they don't think about it like that, at least the Indian diplomatic corps. Other than, I believe, the finance minister of India and to a degree the foreign minister. But the political establishment of India is so far behind in this regard. Has that been your experience with your dealings with India?
Less so, because obviously we dealt with the two very ministers that you said, the
Right.
finance and the foreign minister, who both were very much looking at taking India now to the next step. When the foreign minister was in Sri Lanka in 23, we had a dinner. I was talking to him about cricket, and I recognized that, they're looking at cricket as being the cornerstone for their expansion internationally. They're not looking at the IPL now. They have broken into the British markets, and now they're going into the American markets. And when I asked him, you're dealing with, or you're competing with Major League Baseball and the NFL, which have millions and of followers and billions of dollars thrown into it. He said, don't underestimate the Indian diaspora. And our numbers there will be able to make an impact.
Right.
So in that sense, they are definitely more outward looking. In terms of Sri Lanka also, the two were, especially the finance minister, were very aggressive in their support for Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
She, led us with the negotiations. I mean, we joke about it but in 22, we have 3 women to thank for Sri Lanka's emergence from the economic crisis: the Indian finance minister, the US Treasury Secretary, the IMF MD. And it was because she literally was in the room with us and helped us through those negotiations that we were able to go. So they see it differently. But I think India, as you rightly said, with the political class, I think there's a failure to understand the Sri Lankan psyche.
Yeah.
They can't comprehend that Sri Lankans don't want to become part of India.
Yeah.
They have failed to recognize that there is always been, true from young days, whether it is a focused approach or whether it is just by happenstance, an anti-Indian sentiment is driven. So in that sense, I think that's where we're seeing this lack of connectivity between the Indian political establishment and Sri Lanka.
Right.
So you're finding where you have the prime minister, but more the foreign minister and the finance minister having to really pull along with them this whole huge political establishment to recognize the value in which Sri Lanka has to offer. But also, it has to be dealt with carefully. They can't bully their way into us. I think that is something that India is probably only in the last 10 years, they have really been able to grasp. I think until then, it was always a case of where we wanted, no one else is getting it. Trincomalee Port, case in point. There have been, the Jain Commission report in India has shown that from testimony that they believed that Trincomalee was going to be given to the Americans, so they've interfered. So they're used to bullying that way, but now I think they're beginning to realize that a bit more of the light touch of diplomacy is required.
Yeah.
And that is why we have seen things move forward to an extent.
Right.
Also, we also have to, I think, recognize, and I know a lot of my Indian friends are going to be angry with this, but there was a lethargy that had kicked into their foreign policy as well.
Oh, without a doubt.
So they sort of assumed, Sri Lanka is going to be stuck with their war. We're all right. The war ended in 2009, and before they knew it, China had just exploded. Yeah. So I think they have recognized that now, and they are moving a little more forceful and focused.
If India says to us, we'll open the market up to you, you don't have to open the market up to us, because it's nothing for them. Is that worthwhile if they do that in exchange for much less Chinese influence here? Is that a trade-off you would take if you were in the foreign policy office?
Oof, that's a tough one. I mean, we'll have to really look at it. I mean, what do they mean by less Chinese influence? Is it, investment in infrastructure? Is it personnel on the ground in terms of, Chinese citizens? Now we've seen there's been a noticeable increase of Chinese citizens here working from these IT centers.
Yeah, very, very, yeah.
So, I mean, I will have to go into the nitty-gritties of that. But as I said, I don't think Sri Lanka is ever going to be in a position where we can trade one off for the other. So we can't say, yeah, you know what, we'll go with India, China, thank you, but no thank you. That's not going to work, because at the end of the day, the ability to have options and alternatives is what will keep us in a strong bargaining position.
But can we treat India equally as we do with China? We can't.
No,
right?
we can't.
We can't.
We can't. We have to recognize they're our closest neighbor, they're our strongest neighbor. And really, when you put everything on the table, we stand to gain the most from India. So purely from a transactional point of view, no, you can't. Culturally, you can't. So absolutely, you can't treat them the same. India will always have pride of place in that way.
Right. Could you explain, because India is a union of states, they have a very different political system, right? I think that's a misconception Sri Lankans have. They view India as one entity from the center. But the center is a different government from the government in Tamil Nadu. So how does that affect our relationship with India?
Well, I think we have to recognize that we need close relations with South India, Tamil Nadu, especially. During the war...
Is that possible?
It is possible. It's possible because it was something that we were exploring, and it was looking positive when we were in government in 2022.
Okay, but you don't feel like because the Tamil government is different from the Delhi government?
There'll always be pushback, but I think Delhi has to always be reassured that we are not going with Tamil Nadu and only Tamil Nadu. What we do with Tamil Nadu, we will also, balance it out with integration elsewhere. But it only makes sense, Tamil Nadu being the closest to us, that we would start with them and then spread out. We also have to recognize that Tamil Nadu has very close ties with Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan, at the end of the day, will feel more comfortable in Tamil Nadu or in Chennai than they will in New Delhi.
Right.
That's the bottom line. I mean, during the war, the North was watching channels from Chennai rather than watching the local channels in Sri Lanka. So there's always been that connectivity between the two countries or the two regions in that sense. So again, just like, when you look at India and China, India is going to be given pride of place. The south of India will be given a slightly higher leg up than the rest of India, simply because of the proximity to Sri Lanka and the cultural, the religious, the linguistic ties that we share with the region, as opposed to, further north.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I'm curious to know what your take is on this. You said India will be the second, third largest economy by 2050. That will fluctuate. But India is a very diverse, very dynamic democratic system. I'm going to say they're not exactly a democratic country, but they have a democratic system where, if I look at Japan, Italy, countries like that, they lost World War II. And to me, they're vassal states of the United States. They can't make purely independent decisions themselves. There's a general that sits in Japan and he makes, a US general. I feel America wants to do that to India. And by 2050, they might make India somewhat of a vassal state of America, because India's internal political system is so chaotic and so vulnerable that it's possible. What happens to us in that potential scenario? Or do you even see that as a potential scenario? Because right now, India, I give them full credit, they hold their ground. Can they hold their ground forever?
I think they can definitely hold their ground, but it's forever. But I think definitely in this century, they'll be able to hold their ground. India is a country that they achieved independence on the back of national pride. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka, we have got this very wrong impression that independence was just handed to us on a platter. We haven't, really looked at our movement.
That's true.
But India, they made sure that, that pride has been instilled in them. And they have also recognized that, let's go back several hundred years, and we were an empire then also. We had our own civilization. Again, something Sri Lanka forgets. We look at ourselves and we say, oh, we're a 78-year-old country. No, we're not. These 78 years was after a hiatus of 300 years, of which before that was almost 1,000 years. India has instilled that into their people. And fortunately, Japan, South Korea, these were states that were beaten and downtrodden by America. I mean, Japan had not one but two nuclear bombs dropped on them. They were completely dismantled. And then America built them or rebuilt them in their image. But we're seeing in Japan push back now. There is slow efforts being made by Japan to slowly, I won't use the word decouple, but definitely exert more sovereignty, especially over their defense and all. They've overturned the laws. They've started now allowing for greater buildup of militarization.
Well, my theory with that, Dinouk, is that America is actually forcing them to do so.
I think America is
just a pawn.
I think there is, but I think America is, and I think for countries like us, for countries like Japan, I think they're recognizing that in Trump, they have an individual who is pro-isolationist. So I think they're going to try and get themselves as far ahead as possible before the change comes, and they have a next president who says, you know what, I'm going to revert back to the post-World War II status quo of America interfering everywhere. So say what you will about Trump, I think the opportunity is there for countries that want to start to stand on their own 2 feet. He's providing the opportunity because he's very pro-isolationist. Now, when we come back to India, the way they handled Trump in terms of the tariffs, I think points to the fact that, yes, they are going to not run after them. I mean, it was in Trump's first term that Modi went to Houston and had that rally and,
Howdy Modi.
Howdy Modi.
Yeah.
And everyone thought that, oh, these are, the two best buddies.
Yeah.
Things have changed
Drastically.
And to Modi's credit, he's not running behind Trump. He's not also throwing it aside. He knows that, they need America. But he's not running behind him. Yeah. Where the test's going to come in for India is, are they able to continue to produce strongman leaders in India?
Right.
Modi, and I think the cult of Modi and the BJP being behind Modi, all of that, and the RSS, everyone, they've all gotten behind him. So he's able to control this whole, as you rightly said, a whole collection of different political establishments. Yeah. I don't see another leader in the wings in that way in India who will be able to follow these footsteps, and they're big shoes to fill. So,
and that's a real question Sri Lanka should ask itself.
Sri Lanka does need to ask themselves as to how are we going to navigate the post-Modi years in India. Yeah. I don't think that's something we've looked at all.
Think, and there's no discussion about that here.
We are realistically 3 years away from, I think, Modi.
A new prime minister there.
And most likely it will be BJP. But if it's Congress, then all bets are off in terms of, we have never had a good relationship whenever India has had a Congress government in play.
Yes. They're trying to, decoupling from China is kind of what's going on in the world. And India feels like it could be the replacement of that. I don't see that happening at all, because I don't see America making the same mistake they did with what they did with China. Yeah. They view India as like an infant that could grow very powerful, so let's not do the same thing. So in that world, where can we go personally? Who should we focus on, do you think? Because there's no equal diversification, right? We need to focus strategically on some components, some places.
I think we have to recognize that the power shift that we're seeing globally is not from country A to country B. It's going from country A in this situation in the US, and it's now dispersing amongst several blocs. You got BRICS,
Yeah.
you've got ASEAN,
Yeah.
you got the African Union, you got the GCC, you've got blocks all over the place. Within those blocks also, you've got smaller blocks.
Yeah.
So Sri Lanka needs to look at this and see where are these power shifts happening and what do we have to offer these groupings that will ensure that we have a seat at the table and we're not just knocking on the door, chasing behind each and every one. So, and similarly, we need to again bring ourselves into the global supply chains, which we're not. As long as we're on the outside, we are then reliant on one or the other. But if we bring ourselves into it, we are not going to become, at least not overnight, we're not going to become the next Singapore, which is quite depressing when you think 40 years ago, Singapore was saying they want to be the next Sri Lanka. But it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to look at how those countries also balance it out.
Yeah.
Singapore is, for all of China's brutish tactics in the region, Singapore still has close relations with China. They're not going to throw it out. Similarly, they're also going to keep America close. But they're also going to take stance when they need to. And definitely when it comes to freedom of navigation and all, they're not afraid to voice their opposition to what China's doing. But I think they do so because they're confident in the knowledge that what they're bringing to the table with their relationship with China overshadows their stance on moral issues.
Right. Makes sense.
So that's where Sri Lanka also needs to position ourselves. It requires a complete overhaul of our foreign policy.
Yeah.
It needs the development of a very focused white paper, something that in 22 we were developing and we had the first drafts ready, which Sri Lanka then needs to go one step further, and it needs to become a bipartisan product. We can't have our foreign policy, like every other policy, changing every time a new government comes in.
Yeah.
Our foreign policy needs to be a universally accepted doctrine for the people of Sri Lanka. That would then ensure that there's longevity. And whatever else we do, we know that this particular piece of, or this particular direction we're going in, will continue on.
I agree with you. I hope we could do that. But with all the interference that comes into our political and business class is so big by great powers that there's no chance we have a...
Because, our conversation, our public discourse on foreign policy is nil.
Yeah.
And so businesses and the political establishment are easily swayed by the big powers because there's no support domestically for them.
Right.
But, let's look at, militarily. We've stood firm on many issues because there has been public discourse, there's been public support, and even public opposition, but opposition also always is or does promote further discourse. But when we look at our foreign policy, there hasn't been that. So, we are still stuck on the idea that, India is always going to try and take over us. China has some eyes on us, but we're not really sure what China wants. So,
but why is that, do you think? Is that because of us being an island, that we've been closed off? Where does this come from?
I don't know. I think it's just something that gradually just seeped into society. I think with the war, 30 years, we were so focused internally. And then matters, I think, got ahead of people. As soon as the war ended, we were caught in the next power struggle between China on one hand and the US and India on the other hand, and we're still not out of it. But no one has taken the time also to educate the public on this, be it from the political class or the academic class. No one has really taught to, one way we can move out of this is by actually broadening the scope of conversation.
Right. When I think about the Quad, Australia, Japan,
India and the US.
India and the US, or even BRICS, Anybody who joined BRICS got heavily tariffed and punished because that's a threat to the US dollar, and you do not threaten the US dollar. You will get punished. Where does Sri Lanka stand with the Quad and BRICS? What should we do with those multilateral organizations?
So I think we have to deal with them separately. The Quad is something that it is a defense dialogue.
Well, targeted at China, right? They can say whatever they like.
Absolutely.
It's targeted at China.
I mean, and this is something that should, and that is why I went back. I'll go back to that earlier point I made on the need for the Colombo Security Conclave.
Right.
There needs to be a clear defense structure in place so that we have a seat at the table. We don't need to be part of Quad, but we need to be part of a bloc that can engage Quad. And so our concerns are raised. And it's not just Quad, it's AUKUS. Two of the three are outside countries. Again, purely focused on China. Yeah. And all that we're doing is we're turning the Indian Ocean and our region into another hotbed for conflict. Yep. So in terms of that, we need a seat at the table to be able to have our voices heard. In terms of BRICS, it's not an easy question. Again, though, we need to take heart from countries such as Brazil, who showed that they were willing to push back on it. BRICS is in its early days. I know the naysayers like to promote the idea that there's no way India and China are going to be able to cooperate. But, they're getting by. And I think both countries know that commerce trumps everything else. So,
isn't the long-term idea with BRICS one currency?
Is it one currency or is it a basket currency?
A basket currency.
And I mean, that for a country like us, we shouldn't be opposed to that. I mean, look what happens when the dollar takes a hit. Everything in the country just, goes up in flames. Why can't take Russia? What you asked why we can't purchase? Russia doesn't want to purchase in dollars. They want either Indian rupees, Chinese renminbi. They want alternative currencies which we don't have. Why? Because right now our trading partners are all dealing with the dollar alone. Now, Sri Lanka is nowhere near economically sound to be able to go and lead a charge against the dollar or explore the possibility or lead an exploration for. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that Sri Lanka also needs to, again, close the door on matters such as BRICS and their exploration of a basket currency. It's more a case, though, of where those decisions need to be taken with experts in the room, and rather than simply with those who are worried about what's going to be the political fallout. Be ready to look further down the line. We're not looking for a 2-3 week solution, but rather, 5-10 years for the results to really be
to be seen with that.
Yeah.
You're speaking specifically about BRICS.
Talking about BRICS and, moving in general, also being ready to take decisions that will see us move away from the status quo in that sense. So if we want to go back to America and, as I said, we start exploring alternative markets for our exports. There's no reason why we should just say, we have a trade surplus with America, let's not upset the apple cart. It's stagnant.
That's ridiculous,
So let's keep it going, but let's also always, have alternatives in line.
As the world gets wealthier, we often talk about wars that are going on currently. We always talk about World War I and World War II. Tell me what you think. My theory is that we're already in World War III, or at least the beginning stages, because World War III won't look like World War I or World War II, since 1 and 2 look very different from each other. I think World War III will look more like hybrid proxy conflicts with a lot of regional wars. And as you said early on, the global supply chain is it's going to change forever. What we knew for the past 75 years is done. if we are to survive in a world where great powers are coming in and fighting proxy conflicts, we are currently in a vulnerable position. Do you see a possibility where we will be used for a proxy conflict, perhaps to contain India? Perhaps both America and China can use us to contain India.
So I don't think World War III is going to be Allies versus Axis. Or, it's not going to be two clear camps.
Yeah.
It's going to be, I like to saying that I picked up somewhere, so it's not my saying, but we're not world war, but world at war.
Oh, that's nice. I'll use that.
And it's a case of where, as you said, there'll be conflicts around the place. Right now we've got Russia and Ukraine, which has then destabilized, especially Eastern Europe. We have the Iran-US-Israel war, which has destabilized the Gulf region. You have the South Sudan conflict, which has thrown issues into Africa.
Which, by the way, does not get enough attention, the Sudan conflict. It's probably one of the most horrific currently ongoing in the world.
And doesn't even get 30-second news clip.
No.
So we're going to have, you have the South China Sea, where there is a conflict. It's not a conflict in the traditional sense, but there's a conflict happening there. So yes.
India-Pakistan.
That's right. They fought a war last year.
Yeah.
It lasted a few days, but it was a war. There's no getting around that fact. Sri Lanka, are we going to be drawn into the proxy? I can't say. But I think we have to brace for the possibility that a conflict will enter our region.
Yeah.
Because as I said, the Indian Ocean is a key point in the global economy. Control over the Indian Ocean is key. Let's look at the most successful and the largest empire, the British Empire. The Indian Ocean was called a British lake because they controlled it. And they knew by controlling it, it made life a lot easier for them.
Right.
The colonies all over Asia and Africa were all secure because they controlled this region. Now with economies rising up, as I said, 3 of the top 20 are going to be from the Indian Ocean region alone. It's definitely going to feature. And the absence of any coherent policy by the regional stakeholders to how the Indian Ocean will be governed leaves it open for possible emergence of a conflict.
Right.
And that is why I was critical of India when the sinking of the Iranian vessel Iris Dena happened. The net security provider, and they stayed silent on the matter.
Yeah.
So it raises several questions. Did they know?
Yep.
If they knew, did they inform Sri Lanka? If they didn't know, why didn't they know? If they knew and they didn't inform us, why didn't they? If they did inform us, why did we stay silent?
No matter how you slice it, it's terrible.
Yeah. So India and the region needs to look at this very seriously. And I think accept that India alone is not the deterrent, because when the first, it was the first salvo was fired, they came up short.
Yeah.
So Sri Lanka does need to prepare. What that entails is going to require a lot more study.
Okay. I want your honest take on Sri Lanka's foreign service. What has your experience been like, and do you feel like it is up to par? I've been told that there are more people that work in the US embassy here than our entire foreign service across the globe, which, by the way, is extremely suspicious of why they need so many people here, but that's for another time.
Look, our foreign service have capable individuals who are unfortunately 2 decades behind the ground realities.
Okay.
They are not recognizing and appreciating that there is a very clear shift in the power structure globally. They are holding firm to the ideas that the US and Europe will continue to govern all global affairs.
Right.
There is shortfall in that they have been hamstrung with an absence of a policy, foreign policy in that sense. Everything changes every time a new government comes in. Unfortunately, if you take countries like the US, Britain, their foreign policy by and large stays the same. Within it, there may be tweaks here and there, but their approach to global matters remains the same. We have couched our absence of a foreign policy in this idea of friend to all, which is a very easy way of saying, we stick with the non-aligned movements ethos of just burying our heads in the sand. And that is what's happening right now. So there is lethargy that has kicked in to the foreign policy, and to the foreign relations establishment, which needs an absolute overhaul. We need new, younger people who have exposure to the international world coming in to this department. Unfortunately, there's a lot of gatekeepers there, so it prevents those from the outside who want to come in. There's always been known that there's conflict and tensions between the foreign cadre, the foreign relations establishment, and the rest of the civil servants.
Right.
So it is.
And what is the tension based off of? This ideology?
I think there's a bit of ideology. I think there's a bit of the belief that, the foreign relations establishment are more permanent, whereas the rest of the civil servants tend to get transferred around. They don't have ownership over the ministries that they're in. You can be in the health ministry today, and next week you could be moved to education. Whereas the foreign ministry, its trained diplomats have ownership over it. So I think that is one of the issues. But it needs fresh blood. It needs an injection of that because, as I said, they're very capable individuals, but they're lacking the support. And unfortunately, because of politicization also, too many people have entered the foreign service seeing it as an opportunity to, get a nice posting overseas.
Yeah. And I kind of fear that we put our own perception onto the rest of the world, much like the Americans, by the way. But we kind of do the same thing, even though we criticize them.
And I think that's fine if we're doing it with the backing of a framework of a foreign policy that we are working within.
Sure.
What's happening now is that many of these diplomats, they're in Colombo where, there's just a lot of paper pushing. And then they go out. And I saw that a lot of those officers were energized when we were there because there issues such as climate change and all, the officials who were in charge of that were energized because suddenly they were given something to work for rather than just, running the day-to-day events and
operations,
suddenly their brains were being taxed and they welcomed that. So definitely you need the top to motivate them, but you also need the bottom to be pushing them up. And I think both are lacking right now.
Okay. If you had to rebuild this country's foreign policy from scratch, where would you start?
As I said, first, I'll look for a consensus on a foreign policy. We would have to draft it based on wide-scale consultations. Because it's only once that framework is in place that then we'll be able to, find the capable people to implement it and to see it through.
Do you even see that as a possibility? It's too politicized.
No, I think it is. I think it is possible. I don't think it's ever been tried, to be honest. I don't think there has ever been a focused effort to get a foreign policy moving that will go across party lines in that sense. We've seen it. We've had, of course, it hasn't moved forward to a great extent, but we've seen it with the Constitution. And speaking from experience and knowledge on the ground, while the idea of abolishing the executive presidency is something that is, promoted, the general public doesn't want it. they're happy with keeping the presidency because they see it as a safeguard.
Yeah.
And that is why, we sort of fool ourselves with running slogans of abolishing the executive presidency, but most people aren't voting for that.
Yeah.
But that is a result of our conversations that we have been able to say that's where we are right now. So similarly, I think we absolutely have to try with foreign policy as well. We need to bring it out to the open and allow various groups to have their say.
Right.
And really draft a framework that will last more than one government, two governments, 10
Right.
years.
10 years.
It needs to go down the line for the next 25 years. If
you're in the UMP, why didn't Ranil's administration manage to get a coherent foreign policy doctrine going?
I think we didn't have a mandate at that point. We were busy firefighting. We took up a bankrupt country. We didn't have, with all due respect to the members of parliament who supported the president, they were from another party. So they themselves were not interested or focused on foreign policy, and they certainly were undecided on what the line should be.
What about 2015 onwards?
I think 2015 there were efforts made. I know definitely the former Foreign Minister Mangla Samaraweera definitely put a lot of effort in revamping the foreign policy. There again, we have to remember it was only 3 years. By 2018 March, the president was supporting a no confidence motion against his prime minister, and everything fell apart from that point onwards. So political instability has, I think, been one of the keys to not just foreign policy, but a lot of policies not being carried forward. But 2015 efforts were definitely made. There was drives made to, I think, really lay out what we are going. Certainly from 2015 to 2022, approaches or focuses have changed. And I think that is also important for us to sit back and look at where we went in those 7 years, what led to those changes in focus. But again, it's a case of where we made the mistake, I think, in 2015 was those conversations were closeted to only select groups.
Right.
It wasn't opened up. Had there been public attention on it, that would have driven the conversation further.
You're right.
Would have fueled it.
Would have fueled it.
Yeah.
I understand that. I mean, we've had so many politicians here, like they're coming, going. Talking to all of them, I've come to the conclusion that there's no hope in relying on any political figure or really anything like that. We need institutions that can drive certain strategic objectives.
We need institutions, and we also need the voters to recognize that their responsibility doesn't end the day after the election.
Yes.
We talk about accountability
without
recognizing that accountability starts and ends with the voter. We have gotten too comfortable voting in individuals and then forgetting all that they said during that election. And that, for me, points to two issues. One is that we lack the focus as a voter, and two, we're not really looking at what they're saying. We're too focused on the individual rather than the substance of what they're saying.
Right.
I think that's where populist politics has killed us.
You would describe that as populist politics, because you can also be populist with very good policy.
Yeah, but I think that in our case, in Sri Lanka, we have definitely for a while now, focused too much on the individual without looking at the policies. If we look at, for example, this current government, in terms of policies, they have run policies very similar to ours, yet they ran on a very opposition platform. And I think that what is said and what is done are two different things. And it's not just this government. Successive governments have done that. They have promised one thing, and then they have delivered or tried to deliver something else. And it is unfortunately, or fortunately, because it can be solved, it's the fault of both the politician and the voter. Because the politicians also recognize that they're more likely to win if they say we're going to reduce fuel by 100 rupees, rather than, look, we're going to have to bear the brunt for the next 2-3 years while we invest in renewable energy, so that in 5 years we can reduce it by 150 or 200 rupees. But in the meantime, we're going to spend more to get there.
But why is that not? Why don't they do that? Because if their goal is to stay in power, then they can just take the brunt of it politically for 3 years, and by the 5th year, people will vote for them.
I think the political establishment or the political class, especially the old brigade, have gotten too used to saying what they think people want to hear. And I think...
Where has that got them?
Absolutely. But I also look at our 24 election. We had one candidate who said, we're going to leave the IMF and we're going to look at doing it a different way. We had another candidate who said, I'm just going to bring back all the stolen money. We had a third candidate who said, look, things are tough. We're going to have to continue down this path, but it will go forward. And when you look at it, the public voted for what sounded the easiest option, which was just bring back the stolen money.
Yeah.
So the results also show that it's not what you're saying, but how you're saying it.
How you frame it.
Yeah. And I think that is where the issue is, that the nuance in our political discourse is absent. And that is why foreign policy is not being discussed publicly, because it's not an exciting topic in that sense. As you said very early on in the conversation, what will a family from Kandy see as the impact from, let's not even talk about Iran, let's talk about the war in Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
The trickle-down effect is longer, but no one has taken the time to explain it to them and bring them into the conversation.
Yeah, no one really knew Ukraine was the food basket of the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we've been so exposed in this world. So if you were to tell a 22-year-old, this is why geopolitics matters to you, this is why Sri Lanka should take a very specific approach, what would that be?
I would tell them that they need to go back to our history.
Okay.
Read up on our history. Look at that pre-colonial time onwards. Sri Lanka has always had a role in regional and global affairs. We go beyond post-independence. We played a significant role. And every time that we have, the country has moved forward in one way or the other.
Right.
Not every decision taken has been the right decision. I mean, that's natural. No country is going to take only right decisions. There'll be wrong decisions taken, but we got to learn from that. But we have to also then be able to look at those periods and compare it with the periods during the war and immediately after, where we were, through a making of our own, we were sort of in a sense of isolation. We were focused on the war. We were battling issues regionally with obviously India's involvement, Pakistan's involvement. We were having to deal with, right after the war, the Europeans and the Americans on the human rights issues. And we can see then the difference in terms of how the country progressed when we were being proactive and when we were just allowing ourselves to be taken along with the tide.
Yeah.
So I think, and in all sense of, transparency, I'm a historian by training. So, but I've always said that if we want to know where we're going, we have to look at where we came from.
Yeah.
And it is essential that, a 22-year-old and younger, they read the histories of Sri Lanka, that we can then recognize that at no point have we actually ever been an island. We have never been sealed off from the rest of the world we've always played a role, whether it is small or big. There's been, some role that we have played, and we're not going to escape that fact. Even if we want to, even if tomorrow we decide that, we're cutting off relations with everyone, we're just going to just look inward. No one's
Build a
going to let
wall.
us. No one's going to let us build that wall.
Yeah.
So instead, let's be prepared for what is going to come. Because the smallest issue anywhere else in the world will have an impact on us. People may ask, okay, what's a war in Africa going to do?
Yeah.
Without realizing that some of our biggest companies, including places like LOLC, are stationed in Africa. And if their business interests are impacted, it's going to have an impact here.
Yeah.
So let's always keep our finger on the pulse in terms of geopolitics, because Sri Lanka will always be impacted by something that happens elsewhere in the world, simply for that strategic location that we love to pat ourselves on the back for having.
Yeah. One thing I feel like I wish Sri Lankans knew is, once you get to the top, especially in country nation states, individuals that get to the top go through a power funnel, and to climb that you have to be more ruthless as you get to survive in that ecosystem. So when our diplomatic corps or our politicians meet with Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump, these guys operate on a very different level. They're almost psychopaths. I would say they're all psychopaths. How can we deal with people like that at the very, very top without losing our own principles and losing our own morals? What's the balance between doing what is right for us and doing what is right for all of humanity, right? Because at the end of the day, they view it as a zero-sum game.
I think we first have to recognize that for all the photo ops and all, none of these leaders are friends of ours.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Modi can have his arm draped over the president, but he's not
Apparently
friends.
he's a killer.
Apparently,
according
absolutely.
to Trump.
Yeah, that's right. So, and things change. They're best friends, now they can't be in the same room.
Yeah.
So, first, I think we have to recognize that.
Yeah.
That everybody is in it for themselves. So, how can we get what's best for our country from those relationships? But at the same time, can we also ensure that we are able to stand up to what's happening elsewhere on the off chance that it could happen to us? Any day now, they could decide that, Trump can decide that he doesn't like the president and, arrest him or remove him or whatever it is. There's no guarantee.
Yeah.
So at least ensure that as a country, we take stands on those matters that are affecting others, so that when the time comes, we won't be alone in our corner.
Right.
I think that's something that, and as I said, just to reiterate, to recognize that nobody's our friend.
Right. That's the way to deal with the world.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you for coming.
No, thank you for having me.